Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 8 of season 5 of Arrow called Invasion. So not only is this big part 2 of the big, no, I guess part 3 actually, of the big, CW verse crossover, Heroes versus Aliens, this is also Arrow's 100 episode, anniversary episode, or 100th episode in any case, which of course is quite the big milestone for any TV show. And I do have to say, this episode does not disappoint. Now, the whole, plunge the hero into their sort of fantasy life as a way to deal with them. I mean, that's certainly something that's been done before. We saw on Supergirl last season for the girl who has everything story, which of course is based on the man who has everything story from the Superman comics, written by, of course, the legendary Alan Moore. And then a lot of people noted that this episode is also very similar to an episode of Batman the Animated Series, Her Chance to Dream. And it definitely is a lot more in tune with Her Chance to Dream, in my opinion, simply because, well, Arrow has always borrowed liberally from sort of Batman tropes when it comes to Oliver. But this is, I do love that TV tropes noted the continuity cavalcade trope definitely applies here. And there's a lot of fun stuff going on here. So sort of Oliver having the chance to sort of see what his life might have been like if he hadn't gotten on the Queen's Gambit. It certainly is very interesting. Everybody's life is genuinely does seem to be a lot better. He's getting married to Laurel. Thea's gone into business for herself. Quentin doesn't seem to be struggling with alcoholism. Life is good. But, this being comics and this being TV, of course, very quickly little anomalies start to pop up. This is something we've seen 100 times before, but it doesn't mean that it isn't interesting. It's great to see some of these actors back, especially like Colin Dahl. Oh, well, no, wait, he's in back, actually, does he? It's great to see Oliver's parents back. And just all these other little bits and pieces here. And it leads to some really emotional stuff, like Oliver's interactions with his parents, particularly at the end when he basically has to say goodbye to them. And when he says goodbye to Laurel, it really drives home just how much Oliver has lost and how much has been taken from him. His father murdered a guy right in front of him and then committed suicide. His mother was murdered right in front of him. Laurel was murdered right in front of him. And getting to see a world where things could have all worked out so much for the better. Malcolm Merlyn even was kind of like the friendly uncle to Oliver for most of his life. Unofficial uncle, of course. So, yeah, there's more to that story there. Honestly, the only real bit about this episode that I really thought worked out poorly was the whole thing where Thea decides to stay in the fantasy, which frankly I thought spoke rather poorly of her character. And then it basically takes it back 10 seconds later with this like, look, I changed my mind, I don't want to talk about it. It's just like, okay, now that's crap writing at its finest. That's junk right there. Which is especially sad as it came up on the heels of that really great Oliver saying goodbye to her scene, and then him having that also tough moment of explaining to the rest of the team that Thea's decided to say screw the real world and live here in this little fantasy la la land. We all knew she would come around, but still, I do think that was a disservice to Thea's character. But nonetheless, I also like that they did take a little bit of time in this episode to remind us that Laurel's proper name is actually Diana Laurel Lance, since she just preferred to go by her middle name, which I think is kind of a way of sort of... there's no way they're not going to use Earth 2 Black Siren against Oliver at some point. And remember, that version of Laurel called herself Diana Drake, so apparently on that Earth, she preferred to go by her first name, and then I think it might have been mentioned that her mother's maiden name was Drake. I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, there's no way we're not going to get to see Oliver versus Black Siren probably sooner rather than later, but I guess we'll have to see that happen in 2017. It was also interesting to see what they were doing with the other characters. Sarah seems to be pretty much just sort of an average person leading a happy life. They do not sort of have Laurel have that moment where he goes, "You're like, I actually thought you and Oliver might hook up." Well, again, that's a reference to sort of what was going on the Queen's Gambit, and also that Sarah and Oliver did briefly hook up after she came back to Star City. Didn't last very long, and after that, Sarah's kind of like, you know what? I think I'm just going to focus on girls from now on. Which, gee, Oliver, no, we're not going to get that was too easy a joke. Also, kind of thought that the stuff that they did with Ray this episode was a little bit thin, but again, Ray is more of a Legends of Tomorrow character these days. Now, I did like that it made sense that they would take the non-metahuman heroes because, well, if something were to go wrong, you don't want a metahuman running around in the middle of your spaceship. So there's that. Dig as the Hood, that was interesting. It very harkens back to some of the stuff he did in season 1, where you sometimes would double for Oliver. And of course, there were some really nice little nods there, like "No one can know my secret." And of course, at the end of it all, Oliver takes down Deathstroke by shooting the arrow into the black eye socket on his mask, just like how he had that with the mask on Lian Yu back in season 1, which was obviously set up so much of what happened in season 2. Some other nice little nods. I mean, if you paid really close attention to the shots of the skyline, you could see some building that was obviously the headquarters of Malcolm Merlyn's corporation. I don't think we ever saw that in season 1, so I thought that was a nice little touch. I would have liked some sort of little idea of what Sarah had been doing with her life. Obviously, just that she wasn't in Star City. And we tend to forget that Ivo actually trained Sarah in sort of, I guess, with biology or something like that, and that she turned out apparently to have a knack for it. Who knows what Sarah was studying in college or whatever before she went down the Queen's Gambit. But the fact that Sarah kind of does have a little bit of a science background, I do wish they'd touch on that a little bit more, rather than constantly going on with her whole League of Assassins thing. But in all fairness, she's obviously a much better assassin than she would be a doctor or a scientist. But still, I kind of like the idea that she does have this sort of side to her that really doesn't get mentioned very often, but I think is potentially quite interesting. Let's see, what else? Okay, now obviously it was very cool that they were able to get John Barrowman here on the show. We of course have another matchup with Damien Darhk, but again, these characters, the actors have of course been contracted to appear across multiple TV shows this season, and they're not the only ones. But still, one more. Let's have Malcolm Merlyn and Damien Darhk fighting together. I mean, that's cool. I still can't wait till we see more of that over on Legends of Tomorrow. Now, Manu Bennett is a guy who's very busy with other work, mostly like he's one of the big characters on the Shannara Chronicles on MTV. I think he's doing some other stuff. And there have been word has been going around the internet that he's not exactly on great terms with the people behind Arrow these days. So obviously, Deathstroke was played by a stuntman, and I mean, that was kind of disappointing. I mean, it was great to see the Deathstroke costume again. It would have been nice if maybe instead of doing that, they'd been able to bring back Ra's al Ghul. But I'm sure if that had been a possibility to get that particular actor back, I'm sure they would have. Nothing's perfect. It was a little bit disappointing, of course, to see the heroes like Sarah takes down Deathstroke basically single-handedly. It's like, well, yeah, if this was a fight in the real world, that probably wouldn't have happened. But again, it's all in this alien computer mind. So, Thea being able to take down Malcolm Merlyn, Sarah, actually think about it, Sarah kills both Damien Darhk and Deathstroke in this weird simulation, which, Sarah is a serious badass, but I think that's probably pushing it a little bit. But just being able to see Thea shoot that arrow to Sarah, grab it, and then have her use that to kill Damien Darhk, the same way that Oliver actually did kill him. I mean, that was a nice touch, and hopefully provides her with a little bit of catharsis about her whole situation. And we also kind of get to spend some little time in the real world, where you notice Artemis is not around. But kind of given the whole thing with her and Prometheus from last time around, it kind of makes sense. They would sort of want her off to the side, where we're not going to be thinking about her because that would just complicate things. The whole thing with Renee not trusting metahumans, I mean, it makes sense, but the whole thing gets wrapped up very, very quickly before it really has any time to go anywhere. I don't think he's ever even experienced, had any real interaction with metahumans. I mean, if that's the case, then metahumans are just something he's seen on TV. And, that's not really a terribly considered opinion. And, never mind the Flash, that the Flash has been around doing a lot of good for quite some time. So, I mean, he was even honored by the mayor. So the idea that metahumans are all bad is kind of silly. Then again, people are not always going to take the most rational stance. And he flat out says, I think superpowers are evil because, wherever you guys pop up, more bad people with powers pop up, and things just get crazier and more deadly for ordinary people. And, he does make a reasonable case. I mean, the whole thing there is one of the reasons why Batman tells Superman, look, man, no matter how crazy things get here, unless I specifically ask you, don't come to Gotham. Because the more people with powers, heroes with powers who show up in Gotham, well, that's just going to attract more villains with powers to Gotham, and that's just going to make things in the city even worse. Now, that's kind of questionable logic, but comic book universes run on their own sort of internal rules, and you just kind of have to go along with them. And in that particular instance, Batman is totally correct. So, let's see, what else? I definitely did enjoy the whole escape thing with Ray going oh yeah, certain design principles are fundamental, and then that not working out. Oh wait, no, we need to finish talking about the real world stuff. So this whole Cyberwoman thing, I can't help but wonder if this wasn't a little bit of a nod to Doctor Who. I mean, the name alone. You've got this black lady who's kind of being converted into something that looks more than a little bit like a Cyberman. So maybe there. And it was also really fun seeing Cisco hanging around with the geeky people in the Arrow Cave, hearing him grumble. It's like, oh, a nerdy dude who makes movie references. Never seen that before. Despite that being kind of Cisco's shtick. And I mean, he even references Oliver and Company, which, if you don't know, is a Disney movie from the late 1980s. I even remember watching that movie as a kid. It's typical Disney talking animals movie. In fact, I think my family still has some Christmas ornaments that they got in Happy Meals back then. We're quite the pack rats in our family. And of watching him and Curtis geek out over each other. And then there's the whole bit where Curtis and Rory kind of have this little conversation about, whether or not there's a higher power, which apparently echoes a conversation Mr. Terrific and Ragman had in the comics. It also mirrors the fact that in the comics, Mr. Terrific is actually an atheist, while Rory's position, along with his knowledge of Hebrew, kind of fits in with the fact that a lot of Ragman's story comes from Jewish folklore. And it's also kind of interesting that Rory is apparently a religious guy, but he doesn't make a big deal about it. And it is just kind of interesting that they do acknowledge that yes, this person is a superhero. This person is also religious. Now, not that this is something new. I mean, being Catholic is kind of one of the big shticks of Daredevil. But comics have always kind of walked a fine line with characters and their personal beliefs. A character who has their religious beliefs as a reoccurring principle is the exception rather than the rule. Probably Daredevil being the most mainstream hero for whom their faith is a really big deal. Of course, there are other examples out there, but we're just going to leave it at that. And I definitely love Curtis's whole C-3PO thing. He's geeking out over being able to hack alien tech. Little disappointed we didn't get an Independence Day reference there. And then his whole thing of like, oh man, aliens, they're for real, then this is so cool. And then, oh, but aliens are trying to kill us, which kind of sucks. Oh, but I keep forgetting about the Renee thing. So yeah, the Flash and Supergirl save Renee from Cyberwoman and do a really awesome double team of her, which I thought was I really liked. And then Renee's like, you know what? Maybe people with superpowers are okay. All right, that was weak. That was weak. But yeah, I definitely like the escape from the alien ship and Oliver grabbing the gun and going, oh, I guess some design principles are universal after all. It was really funny to note that somebody had to say, like, okay, Oliver has actually been abducted by aliens. And just sort of, we do have that moment there, and I did love that. I really did love that. And of course, this all wraps up with the escape pod being saved by the Wave Rider, and which has Nate and Vixen on it. And it kind of makes sense from a storytelling perspective that they would be the two that would have to stay behind and hold down the port of the ship because, well, one, you can't just leave a time ship just laying around during something like this. That's a disaster waiting to happen. Also, like the Old West episode of Legends of Tomorrow showed us that steel is indeed more powerful than a locomotive. And of course, Vixen's powers come from magic. So these are the two people who would have been able to actually put up a decent fight against Supergirl. And the kind of the whole thing with last episode of Flash that continued all this was that, yeah, the ordinary heroes are just absolutely getting stomped by Supergirl because she is so out of their league. So this definitely makes for a nice entry point into seeing how things are going to wrap up on Legends of Tomorrow. I'm a little bummed out. I actually have to work tonight, so I'm not going to get to watch the episode and see how things finish until I get up tomorrow morning, but them's the breaks. But nonetheless, this was a really fun episode. Some absolutely great performances from the cast. I mean, Stephen Amell really, really knocked it out of the park this episode. A few moments that were not so strong, but nothing's perfect. So with that, I'm going to call it here, guys. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and of course you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi, and please also join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Until next time, take care and have a good one.